We're now going to make our bonus quilt using the leftovers from our spinning star block. As you remember, each star resulted in 4 of these triangle pieces left over. We're going to use those remnants to make this pinwheel quilt in a baby size. We need 13 pinwheels and we have 12 all ready to go. So we only need to cut pieces for 1 more and the background quilt. And then I'll show you how to assemble it quickly for a really fun, fast, easy bonus baby quilt. In addition to our remnants that we have left over from those spinning star blocks, we need 10 6 by 6 inch squares in our coordinating background fabric, so matching. And then we need to piece 1 more pinwheel. So first of all, we're going to cut those 6 by 6 inch squares on the diagonal once to get 20 triangles. I can set those aside with my other pieces. Now, an easy way to get that remaining 13th pinwheel, you could cut it from extra yardage. If you have extra yardage left on hand, you can easily do it that way, but some remnants you might already have from piecing the first quilt could come from your border. And as you may remember, when we were cutting these strip piece sets originally, I talked about saving some of those little remnants of the polka dots. So we're going to use those. So here are some leftover pieces from piecing my border. And since they're 6 inches wide, they're just the right size to use. I'll use this littler ruler. And from this leftover border strip, I'm going to cut 4 3 1/4 by 6 inch rectangles. Now I can use these leftover polka dots to create those 2-piece squares that were the 6 by 6 inch squares. We're just going to match those up. And one thing to keep in mind as you sew these squares together, we're going to cut them the same diagonal. So if your leftover isn't quite long enough, it's okay because that part's going to get cut off and this time we're going to throw it away. So just make sure that left edge is lined up and then you don't need to worry, or if I've got like this selvage edge over here, it's okay. It's just going to be waste. We just want to make sure that left edge with the print on top is matched up. Stack these up and take them to my machine all at once so I can chain them through. There, let's break the chain and press them. And again, press them toward the print, the darker, busier print. Last one. Right, then get these out of the way and take this to your cutting mat and just cut 4 of those pieces so we can create that 13th pinwheel in this design element. And the rest we can just get rid of. Now that we have our pieces, we're ready to piece our quilt. And this time, we're not piecing blocks. We're actually piecing in rows. So this quilt will have 6 rows. Let me show you how to assemble that. The quilt will lay out like this. Match it up. And again, I recommend lay out the full quilt so you can play with color and fabric placement. and get a nice balance of colors and designs and scale. Let's see, let's do this one. And you will have a nice graphic of this in your class materials that you can use as a reference to help you get the placement of all these pieces. So I'm just going to show you the top corner for now to give you an idea of how it's pieced, and then you can reference those materials for the full layout. But look how fun this comes together really quite quickly, creating a more intricate design with pieces that we would have just thrown away. That might be the start of the next pinwheel there. And here we can do this one. Finish this green, and so on. So you'll have a lot more pieces to work with. From here, we're going to sew these blocks together like half square triangle blocks. So let me put a couple of those through the machine so you can see. Again, we're working with the bias edge, so don't stretch or pull this. Just let the machine do the work and ease that fabric through. Your job is just to guide it along that 1/4 inch, however you mark your 1/4 inch seam allowance in your machine. Now these blocks that we're matching up with the triangles that we cut, the background triangles, those are pretty easy. I'm gonna press this first row toward those background triangles. That seam allowance. Actually, no, we're gonna do something a little different. We're gonna press the seam allowance toward on these first, third, fifth odd numbers. We'll press it in toward the inside of the block. On the second, fourth, sixth, even number blocks, we'll press it outside, and here's why. That way, when I go to piece we're going to piece this this quilt by rows. So I'm going to sew all of these triangles together into squares, and then I can piece my squares into rows. That's the best way to assemble this quilt. And when I go to piece these rows, I want to be able to put, first of all, I highly suggest trimming your little dog ears here. It's going to decrease the bulk a lot as you piece those seams together. And now when I go to lay my blocks on top of each other, again, those seams are opposing. They'll nest against each other. It'll help the whole quilt lie flat, so you won't have so much bulk. Let me show you how that looks. So you can see here, we've got opposing directions. Now, the next row, this is the one tricky thing that you need to keep track of, and it's not that tricky. When we sew our next row together, first of all, we're going to press all our seams, our straight seams, not the diagonal seams, all one direction on our first row. Now when I go to sew my second row together, I'll do the same thing. Let's take these two blocks so I can show you I'll talk a little bit about piecing when it's not with one of those background squares. When we put these together, those seams are going to be perpendicular and overlap just a little bit. And that's just, you just need to be aware that there's a little bulk there, a little bit of bulk, but it still comes through pretty easily. And again, don't stretch that bias edge. Okay, so let's press these seams. And I'll have the pressing arrows in the class materials on the guide for laying out this quilt. That'll help it keep you knowing which direction to press everything. So as you can see on this first block, the seam went in. This time we want it to go out. So again, when we go to sew these rows together, they're opposites. So it's a little bit tricky to keep track of, but it does make a difference. And again, I will have the pressing directions in the guide, so you don't really have to think about too much, but I want to demo it so you can see what I'm talking about when you see those arrows. So this one, we're pressing the opposite direction. And so on. So we'll build our rows. And once we have, I would recommend piece your blocks first, your individual, all of the blocks. So you'll have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 blocks across by 6 blocks down. You'll sew those blocks into those 6 rows, pressing the seam allowances on those straight seams toward the left on the odd rows, 1, 3, and 5, and you'll press those straight seams toward the right on the even rows, 2, 4, and 6. That will help when you go to sew those rows together. Those seams are gonna, again, butt up against each other and help you match those points and help those seams lie flat. I'll have more information about cutting borders for this quilt in the class materials.